Some of you guys might remember my Inarius Poison Scythe push build from back in Season 12, and while that build is still good, it did feel clunky at times. But with the Season of LON coming up, we found a way to make the Poison Scythe push build a LON setup, and it's a lot more smooth, it's a lot more fluid, and it's just all around better, and we're going to get into it in this video. So without further ado, let's get into the LON Poison Scythe push build. Now, a couple quick caveats right out of the gate. One is this is not going to be the top of the leaderboard next season. That will be LON Corpse Lance most likely, maybe even a LON Thorn setup. But if any of you guys have played either of those builds, they suck. Pestilence Cold Lance, to me, will play better than any Lance build ever created. Blood Lance was clunky. LON Cold Lance is clunky. Pestilence Cold Lance feels good. It's a better Corpse Lance build. But of course, LON Corpse Lance is going to be more powerful, which is unfortunate because Pestilence Cold Lance is just a better build all around. And if you guys are like me, you've been pushing Lance since the dawn of Necro. And so you're probably a little tired of pushing with Corpse Lance. And now, while next season you'll actually have options, you can do Thorns. But again, if you've played Thorns before, you're kind of dependent on elite affixes, and it's even more fishy, and it's just all around a really boring build to play, in my opinion. You'll be able to push with mages, but again, if you've been playing a lot of rats, you've been playing a lot of singularity speed, you might be a little bored of mages as well. So Poison Scythe push build with Inarius was a good build, but it was a little clunky. It felt a little clunky at times, and this build with LON and the Season of LON, it's good, man. It feels so good. It feels so smooth. It feels like a fully fledged build. If they could change like one thing, it would make it like a really amazing build. But even without my suggested change, it would be like, it's so good. It's so good. Now, being that this is a push build, there's a lot of mechanics going on here. So we're going to take it kind of slow today. Usually we just have a speed farm build with a lot of mechanics you guys have seen 100 times and are super familiar with. But what is this build? What's going on here? This is Poison Scythe Necro LON version, because this is the Season of LON, and we are all about juicing up our Grim Scythe Cursed Scythe. And you might think, well, you mean a generator for Necro? Like, generators suck. And most of the time you'd be right. But because of a change they made to Leisure to Sustain back in Season 12, where it says Grim Scythe deals additional 80% damage for each point of essence it restores. So in a nutshell, our whole goal is to dump our essence with the Singularity Mage. And Singularity Mage is the only skill that the Necros have that will just dump all your essence, which is why we're utilizing it in this build. Of course, we would much rather be able to use something like the Contamination Mage if they could somehow add an item to the game, Blizzard, that made it so Contamination would maybe consume all of your essence, and then this build would be like even more fun because it kind of be like the first ever melee mage build or melee pet build. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. It still works very, very well. But yeah, so we're just using the Singularity Mage to dump our essence, and Mage is doing 0 damage here. And then because of how Leisure to Sustain works, you know, every single time we Grim Scythe, we're going to get essence back, and the more essence we get back, the more enemies we swipe, the more damage we're going to do. And this thing, stacked with a bunch of area damage, actually does insane amounts of damage. And the thing that I really, really like about this build, if you guys have been playing a lot of Necro, you know, you've been pushing with Corpse Lance, and Corpse Lance was unique when it first came out because it's a different way of pushing the leaderboards. Before, on other classes, you're kind of just fishing for density, fishing for, you know, good pylons, etc., and kind of like how every other class pretty much fishes in this game. And for Necro, you're kind of fishing for like good elite types. You don't really want density, which is kind of weird, which was a nice change of pace when it first came out. But over time, you know, when you're fishing these rifts, all you're doing is kind of killing these elite packs, and so you're not getting tons of experience by killing a bunch of trash. It's more satisfying, I think, to kill a bunch of trash in Diablo 3, and that's exactly what this build does. This build basically brings back, you know, fishing for density, killing giant packs of trash and getting the whole screen of mobs and just wiping them out with your Cursed Scythe. So for a lot of you guys, this is gonna be nice. Now then, how on earth are we juicing up our Poison Scythe even more? One, of course, we're using Leisure to Sustain. Two, we're gonna be using Trag'Oul's Corroded Fang. Pretty much all enemies are gonna be affected by Curse, which is gonna give you a flat 200% increased damage across the board. We are, of course, using Crispin's Sentence, which will give us 100% increased damage 100% of the time, and 300% increased damage when we stun enemies. And when there's a few ways we're stunning enemies here. We're also running Depth Diggers, which primary skills that generate resource deal an 100% additional damage. And of course, that's exactly what Grim Scythe is. And finally, in the cube, we're using Nair's Black Death, which says each different poison skill you use increases the damage of your poison skills by up to 100%. For 15 seconds. And we've got 4 poison skills we're using in this build consistently and easily. That's the key thing. You could squeeze more poison abilities into this build, but it's going to make it feel more clunky. It's not going to be as smooth, and we're going to show you guys how this is just so much better than any poison scythe build we've come up with. Now, looking at the skills, first and foremost, we're using Grim Scythe with Cursed Scythe. Why Cursed Scythe? Well, one, it's the only poison rune, so we have to run it. But it just so happens to be that it is the best rune. Enemies hit by the scythe have a 15% chance to be inflicted with a random curse. However, the primary effect of Trag'Oul's Corroded Fang, which most people ignore because that 200% damage bonus, Cursed Scythe rune for Grim Scythe now has a 100% chance to apply a curse. So every single time we swing our Grim Scythe, Poison Scythe, we are getting a curse applied to enemies, which is just the base curse if you don't have anything rune. So you'll get Leech, the base rune of Leech, you'll get the base rune of Frailty, which is really, really strong, and you'll get the base rune of Decrepify. However, if you have a rune equipped on one of these curses, it's going to pick that rune with your Grim Scythe Cursed Scythe. So say I had Leech and I wanted to use Osmosis, I just equip Osmosis, and when I swipe with my Cursed Scythe, it's going to curse them with Leech Osmosis. However, of course, Leech Osmosis is terrible. In this case, we're going to run Decrepify with Dizzying Curse. Now, we're actually going to be applying that curse manually as we're getting our big packs of density together to make sure, one, we're always proccing our Dainty's Binding Belt, and two, the Decrepify alone actually does really good stuff. Reduces damage of enemies by 30%. But more importantly here is a secondary effect of Dizzying Curse, which says cursed enemies have a 10% chance to be stunned for 2 seconds when hit. Now, we are using what's called the Ancient Parthen Defenders in this build, which says each stunned enemy within 25 yards reduces your damage taken by 12%. So, tons of mitigation. The amount of mitigation you get from Parthens when anything is stunned is massive. With enough density around you and Parthen's procced, you'll be able to face tank like Arcane Lasers and high GRs. This item's really, really good. Again, we're using Skeletal Mage, Singularity, and again, this is just to dump all of our essence pool. This is the only way for a Necro to dump all of its essence. And the rate at which you get back essence in this build with Grim Scythe is really fast, especially if there's a ton of density. With one swipe, you could potentially get your entire essence pool back, which is great for your damage. But you need to be able to get rid of that essence as fast as possible. And unfortunately, as I stated before, the Singularity Mage is the only way to dump all of your essence on a Necro. It would be great if Blizzard added another way to dump essence, especially that was poison related. Another important ability here is Bone Armor Dislocation. One, it's poison, so we're going to get a Nair's Black Death stack. Two, it's obviously going to give us mitigation. And three, enemies hit are also stunned for 2 seconds. And so your initial gut reaction was like, well, cool, I'm going to get my triple damage bonus from Chrisman Sentence if I just spam Bone Armor. But the way this build works, because Parthens are so good, is you actually kind of want to use Bone Armor defensively. If you're low on life and you hit Bone Armor and you start swiping away, chances are you're going to survive like every single time, because it's going to stun everything around you, your mitigation is going to go up through the roof, and you're going to be swiping and thus proccing your base rune of Leech and getting yourself back up to maximum life. Obviously, one of the things this build revolves around as well is COE, and so you do want to make sure enemies are stunned during that poison rotation if you can. Obviously, surviving is more important, so if you have to burn a Bone Armor rotation outside of COE poison, then it's what you got to do. But ideally, you'd like to have a Bone Armor for a poison rotation. Now, another nice thing about this build is it's not super dependent on cooldown reduction. Now, cooldown reduction really only affects your Bone Armor Dislocation, and having more uptime on Bone Armor Dislocation isn't a bad thing, but it's definitely not something we have to gear around. As you can see, we only have 30% cooldown reduction here. There's no like threshold we're aiming for. It's just like if you can squeeze it on a piece of armor, go for it. Now, then the other two skills are kind of nice, and we'll explain why. So we've got this army of poison minions behind us. As you can see, we've got this giant poison golem who actually looks pretty cool, and we've got these little poison skeletons. And you're also going to see in our passage that you're using standalone, so you might be thinking, well, why on earth would you do that? Well, because how these skills work. So one, command skeletons. The active ability will cause my skeletal minions to rush towards the target and explode for 250% weapon damage as poison. This alone really doesn't do any damage. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it certainly doesn't really help you that much. And then every 2 seconds, we're going to basically raise the skeleton. This is going to charge off and immediately explode. So you're actually not going to see these skeletons very much within the rift itself. Because as you can see, they're going to rush in there and they're going to blow up. And so you're really not going to have the skeletons up very often. Now, on the other hand, the golem stays up 100% of the time. And so you're going to be missing 10% increased armor from standalone, but it's still 90% increased armor overall, which is really strong for defense. Basically, the golem consumes all corpses at the target location, increasing its damage by 30% per corpse. And again, the damage sucks. The golem damage sucks, which is really unfortunate because it's really cool looking, but we don't need it to be high damage. That's not what we're based around here. The reason I'm choosing these two skills, and the reason they're so good in this version of Poison Scythe, is that you can numlock them and never actually have to cast them. So all throughout the Rift, I have numlocked 2 and 3. So that means they're just constantly being spammed because you don't care about your corpses that are on the ground. And so you might think, well, you're going to run out of corpses eventually, and then you won't be able to cast the activatable effect of Command Golem, Decay Golem, and you're not going to get that 4 stack of Nair's Black Death. I'm way ahead of you guys. So in the shoulders, we're actually using Raises Volition, which says a Skeletal Mage gains the effect of Gift of Death Rune. So when the Skeletal Mage dies, that crap mage you're throwing out there just to dump your essence, when he dies, he's going to drop a corpse, which will always let you get that Command Golem activatable. On top of that, we're using Moribund Gauntlets, which says your Golem sheds a corpse every second. So he poops out a corpse once a second that we're going to consume for his activatable and keep those stacks up of Nair's Black Death. Genius, right? I know. So before, when you would play Poison Scythe, you maybe had to cast Death Nova, some annoying activatable poison skill that you had to activate to keep up like a 4th or 5th stack of Nair's Black Death. In this build, you're literally just focusing on scything and bone armoring, generating good density, and just making sure everything's cursed. And it plays so much better. It plays so much more smooth than it ever did in the past, and you guys are going to love it. Now then, moving on to other passes, of course we're using Final Service, because again, this is a GR push build. You gotta have a cheap death in a push build. The proc of losing your pets isn't super detrimental. You can lose your Command Golem 4 stack of Nair's Black Death when your Golem dies, but he comes back pretty fast. We're using Rigor Mortis to further decrease the damage they do. This does stack with Decrepify, so we're debuffing them quite a bit, which is good, because you need that to survive, especially those higher GRs. We're using Swift Harvesting just so we can scythe as much as possible. Attack speed is really no slouch in this build. You want to be able to scythe as much as you can. And of course, standalone, we already explained, really, really good for armor and mitigation. Now then, moving on to the gear. The gear is super important to note as well. And there's a lot of reasons we landed on all the pieces that we did, and we'll get into it right now. So for the gloves, again, we're using the Moribund Gauntlets because it makes the Golem poop out a corpse every second, which he needs for his activatable effect, which we need for our Nair's Black Death stack of poison. Ideally, we're all about area damage here. Cooldown reduction helps because, again, cooldown reduction is good for more uptime on bone armor, more chances for you to activate it either for survivability or for damage. But area damage is king in this build. Gotta have area damage as much as you can get. So ideally on the gloves, we would want quadfecta if we can. So like cooldown reduction, crit damage, crit chance, and area damage. But if I had to pick one or the other, cooldown or area damage, I would go with area damage. Shoulders, Raises Volition, again, because that Skeletal Mage is going to drop a corpse. And there's really, you can run Skeletal Pauldrons, I guess, if you wanted to, for another chance at a cheap death. The item itself is kind of dumb. This item just has, way more viability in this build, constant use. So that's why I like it. Raises Volition, you want Int, Bite, cooldown reduction, and area damage. Helmet, Leoric's Crown is really, really nice here. You can either put a life gem in there, and like as I have right now, I have over 1 million life because I feel confident that like 31% cooldown is enough. Of course, you can put a diamond in here and get even more cooldown reduction, more uptime on bone armor, but I just went with more life. And of course, on that, Int, Bite, and crit chance is ideal. Now, ideally on a helmet, it's not a stat we talk about a lot, but reduced duration of CC effects. Your Necro is not immune to any CC whatsoever, so it can be really, really annoying to get frozen. Super annoying to get feared because this build's all about positioning, and to get feared is just really bad. So If you can get reduction to CC effects on your helmets, your jewelry, that's going to be really good for this build. For chests, we're using Aquila, which says while above 90% resource, all damage taken is reduced. Now again, you're not going to have a ton of uptime on this chest. It's going to be nice at times, and you're going to feel the effects of it at times, but there's really no great chest for this build. And you can use Aquila to your advantage if you know what you're doing, especially like moving from group to group or pack to pack. You can try to keep up Aquila. Of course, on the Aquila, we would want in fight, life, and of course sockets. For the belt, of course, we're using Dainty's Binding, 50% damage reduction when there is an enemy afflicted by any of your curses. Of course, the goal is to have enemy afflicted by all of our curses, but again, we're manually applying a Decrepify while we're getting that density together. So we're pretty much going to have 100% uptime on this Dainty's Binding when we need it. Depth Diggers, we kind of already went into. We're using a primary skill for our damage dealer here. So primary skills dealing 100% more damage is really, really good. So Depth Diggers is a no-brainer. And on both the belt and the pants, you can get Grim Scythe damage, so make sure you get that. Boots, we're actually using Illusory Boots because we're not using Blood Rush in this build. Otherwise, we'd run Steward's Greaves. But being able to move through the mobs unhindered lets you get density together easier. It lets you get out of bad stuff without mobs hitting you, and you are kind of a moving tank in this build. So these boots are super important. And on these, you'd probably want Int, Bite, Armor, and Movement Speed. Bracers, we went into Parthen Defenders. Makes us super tanky, especially when we can manually cast Bone Armor, but ideally Poison, Int, Bite, Crit Chance. On our necklace slot, this is going to be a pretty hard thing to roll well. Wisdom of Claw unfortunately has a base attack speed roll, but this basically makes it so we can have more stacks of Bone Armor, which again is something we're always going to have up for mitigation. So this basically gives us like a free unity in our necklace slot. As you guys are going to see here, like we have so much mitigation in this build. It's actually crazy. This is by far and away the most tanky necro build you'll ever play in your life. And on that, you know, it rolls attack speed, so you could do like attack speed, crit damage, crit chance would probably be the best, but this is the best one I could find. Rings, Charisma Sense, of course, staple in any necro build. The dream would be attack speed, crit damage, cooldown reduction, socket. And COE, super important part of the build. COE has really great uptime on the necro because there's only 3 elements. And crit damage, crit chance, and area damage is the dream. On the weapon, we're using Tragos Corroded Fang. And again, the goal here, this one is really good, but this would be better if we had one that was so good we could roll off intelligence. But this would be better, I think. Cooldown into area damage would make this all around a better weapon for this build. Because again, we're all about area damage. Area damage is so good in this build. On the offhand, you gotta have a Ledger Sustain. That's what this build revolves around. Something with int, crit chance, Grim Scythe damage, and area damage would be kind of the dream here. Now, max essence, while it's not as important as it is in, say, like the mage builds where, you know, singularity gets more damage based on how much essence you have. The more essence you have, the more potential damage you get from a swipe. So it's good to have more of an essence pool. So if you can get essence on the secondaries, you should, but that's kind of like a min-max kind of thing. And lastly, in the cube, we're using a unity, even more mitigation. You guys know how unity works. Just make sure you have a unity on your follower, and you're gonna get a flat, huge damage mitigation buff. So you can see we're getting unity, we're getting the damage mitigation from the LON buff, we're getting Wisdom of Kalan, we're getting Parthen Defenders buff, we're occasionally getting Aquila, and we're getting 50% damage mitigation from Dainty's Binding. More mitigation than you've ever seen on a necro. It's gonna feel so weird. And of course, we're not done there. We're also using Golem Skin Breaches in the cube, which reduces the cooldown on the Golem, which is nice because it keeps the Nair's Black Death buff up more often. But more importantly, you take 30% less damage while your Golem is active. And he's pretty much always going to be active. He will die. Like, he can die to a lot of damage. So make sure you notice when he's dead, because you will be losing 30% in damage mitigation. You'll be a little bit more squishy. So we know the skills. We know how we do damage. How does this work? So again, we're playing this like a traditional push build in Diablo. We're fishing for density. Juicy packs of density. We don't necessarily have to kill elites, although we can pretty easily in this build, especially like triple blues. Or elites that chase you throughout the rift are going to be the best kinds to get. Like archers are really going to suck, and stuff like that won't chase you, won't go into your giant packs of density. But basically, you can kill elites just as long as you surround them with density and proc crazy amounts of area damage with your Grim Scythe. But ultimately, you're just trying to get tons and tons of density, tons and tons of progress. And so you're going to try to get, you know, screens worth of mobs together. You're going to try to keep them cursed with Decrepify to not only reduce the amount of damage they do, but also keep your Dainty's Binding buff up. And ideally, on your poison rotation, you want to make sure you have no essence, port in, proc your bone armor to get the crispy sentence damage bonus, and start swiping away like a madman, making sure that the elite and the minions are in the cone of your swipe, right? So you proc massive amounts of area damage. Now, the further you push, the more important it is going to be to get Rift Guardians that spawn mobs. So normally Hamlin is like the bane of a Necro's existence on any other push build, but for this build, it's amazing. Hamlin is what you're after. Just any Rift Guardian spawns adds will be the dream. Now, if you guys haven't tried this build out, again, next season will be the only season you can play this build. So if this interests you at all, I would highly recommend you play it next season. It will probably never be this good again, and it feels so much more smooth than it ever has in this particular setup. I think you guys are gonna like it a lot. It's personally what I plan on pushing with, and again, it's not gonna push, you know, LON Corpse Lance level rest like 130s or something crazy, but I easily farm 110s, you know, with like 5-10 minutes left. I think you could do 115 fairly easy, a little bit of fishing. But like I said, I think it's a lot more fun to fish for density than it is to fish for elite types. And if you guys, again, are like me, like I've already pushed Corpse Lance into the ground. Yeah, you're not gonna see, you know, Poison Scythe at the top of the leaderboard, but it's gonna be a lot more fun. Now, of course, if you guys think I missed anything or if you have any questions, please do comment in the comment sections below. Now that the BlizzCon salt is kind of blowing over, my comment section is much more doable. So again, do leave a comment if you have questions. But that's pretty much going to do it for the build guide, guys. I am really excited about this build. I love this build. It's a ton of fun. It looks cool. It feels cool. It's super tanky, which is so out of the ordinary for the Necro. And I think a lot of you guys are going to like it. But as always, guys, like, subscribe, come over to Twitch, ask your questions. I love you guys. Peace out.